Great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this, Ben.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bobby. It's great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Glad
Yeah.
you're staying safe back in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts.
Yeah. Yeah, doing well.
Good.
Doing well.
So we're going to get deep here. We're going to get deep into Lydian Chromatic land.
Oh, dear. Okay.
I thought we could start with... now, first of all, you are the professor of... What's your official title? The professor of Lydian Chromatic concept at New England Conservatory?
No, I'm just a professor in the jazz department who teaches, Lydian chromatic concept and other things, jazz composition and.
Sure. And then also Longy, and where else are you at these days?
Longy, and then I'm also at UMass Boston every other semester or so, teaching a course on creative and critical thinking.
Sure. Just a kind of a fascinating subject.
Designed.
But
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get into that a little bit later on.
Okay. Sure.
Now, your background, how did you find your way to the Lydian chromatic concept and working with George Russell? Was that primarily an interest in George Russell's music that then became an interest in theory, or was it the other way around, or what's your origin
here? It was. I was. I'm from Michigan originally, and I was going to Michigan State. I was a language and business major there, but I spent most of my time doing music, composing and improvising and jamming out with friends and creating strange sounds and listening to a lot of different albums at that time. And we would make cassettes. My friend Greg Ramsey, and other friends too, but hundreds and hundreds of cassettes, and we would clean off the records and put them on and record them, and we just marinate them and memorize everything. One time we were out looking for albums at a place in East Lansing, and we came across an album by George Russell called Aesthetic, and it intrigued us, first of all, because Eric Dolphy was on it. We were really hip to Eric Dolphy at that time. We hadn't heard of George Russell, but we picked it up, and as soon as I put it on, it was like, wow, this is really like controlled melodies from another, with another perspective.
Sure.
And upon closer examination of the Riverside album down at the bottom, there was, to learn more about George Russell's Lydian chromatic concept, please contact, it's something, Concept Publishing or whatever. Anyways,
wow.
We were able to find a copy of the book, the 1959 edition, 56 edition, I think. I still have it, actually.
Oh, wow.
And, and we just kept pouring through it. It was hard to understand, and I'll be honest, I really kind of never really totally understood it until I came out here in '82 to work to study with George. And the way that I picked him was, I decided to pursue that, was that I went through all of my cassettes, and I thought, with the freedom of a 20-year-old, I thought, well, I'm just going to pick somebody I want to study with. And George Russell's name popped up, and I found out he taught at New England Conservatory. And I called up the conservatory, and Martha, who was the receptionist there in the dean's office, she answered the phone, and I just said, well, I'd like to get in touch with George Russell, and could you give him a message? She goes, well, sure, he's standing right here. And I'll never forget it. She handed the phone. She goes, George, and I hear this, hello? And I was just like freaking, because this is one of my musical idols,
Yeah.
It's like, I don't even know what I said, but the long shot is I came out and I toured NEC. I met George. He wrote in the copy of the concept, he wrote, to my newfound friend Ben, much evolving to higher levels in all things, which is really sweet of him. And I came out here in 1982 in the fall, and I did 4 years. I did, and he was my primary teacher for that whole time.
Yeah, that was your undergrad.
That was my undergrad.
So you switched from business and whatever. What were you talking about?
Foreign languages.
Foreign languages. And what was the? So then you ended up transferring over to NEC, and then you worked with George for 4 years. in your undergrad, and then continued to work as his assistant for quite a long time.
I would say I studied with George for 4 years.
Okay.
It wasn't until near the end of those 4 years that my background in languages and editing and stuff like that, I found myself, he was asking me to help him in editing the Lydian Chromatic concept.
Sure.
Which is something I continued on for another 20 plus years.
Yeah. Do you ever go back and revisit the original book?
I mean, I know what's in it kind of intimately.
Sure. How much different is the original book from the most recent volume? Volume 1. When I say most recent, it was published a long time ago, but the most recent edition
of the Lydian Chromatic concept.
Yeah, correct.
The most recent one has been updated to include more expanded understanding of vertical tonal gravity, which has to do with chord mode relationships, parent
Sure.
scales. I'm probably going to lose some of your listeners here.
We're going to try to take it. We'll take it step by step and try to bring them back in.
I think it's beautiful. It's the last book that George was able to publish at the end of his life, and and explains the foundation of what the Lydian concept was based on, the ideas in it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's a perfect segue to my next question here is, give me your elevator pitch for the Lydian Chromatic concept.
The elevator pitch for the
So I run into musicians all the time who go, yeah, I've heard of that. What is it? And then you go, well, okay, let's see. How do we do this? If you got sort of an introductory blurb, let's say, on what this is or what it encompasses, how would you do it?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily. Elevator pitch sounds like you're trying to sell somebody something.
Sure.
And I mean, maybe in some ways, I think what keeps my sanity is just being able to explain it and facilitate an understanding of the ideas that it's based on.
Sure.
And connect it with things that folks already know, like the major scale.
Sure.
So, and historically, it came about because back in 1946 or 47, George was hanging with Miles Davis, and they were trading changes. And George asked Miles what his musical aim was, and Miles said, "I want to learn all the changes." So I got George to thinking that there must be a different way of looking at chords. So long story short, he got TB. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he was in a hospital for 18 months, during which time he learned about rudiments of music and writing music and stuff. But he also, being entirely self-trained, never graduated with any formal education, relied on his intuitive center. That was really where the concept came from, was all from George's just asking questions, really more scientific questions than anything. Long story short is he thought, well, okay, for every chord, there must be a scale of a group of notes that sound closest to the sound of that chord. All right. So, because this is what jazz musicians had pioneered back then in the 20s and 30s and so on, is playing over Tin Pan Alley and standard tunes and coming up with melodies that conveyed what chord was being played at the moment. A lot of times that had to do with knowing your chord tones and then playing notes around those. Okay, so he said, well, let's look at the major chord to start out with. If I haven't lost you yet, have I, Bobby?
Nope, you're right on. You're on track here. This is great.
Okay, it's great to see you, my friend. All right, let's see. So, all right, so he's in the. Can you see? Yeah, you can see pretty well, right?
Yep. Yeah, doing great.
Good.
Yep.
So he's playing a major chord. This happens to be. Now let's play. Let's play C major. Well, look, just using the ears, that fa, the fourth degree against the major chord, in jazz education terms, we're told that that's the avoid note. You don't really lay on that. You kind of move off it or treat it like a leading tone or whatever, but you don't voice a C major chord with an F in it.
Sure.
Generally. I mean, you can. There's nothing, it's just really out there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's up with the first 4 notes of the C major scale? It seemed to George, and it seems to the ear, that it sounds more F than it does C. In other words, there's an F major chord. Right? All right. And then let's look at the next 4 notes. Oh, that certainly sounds C. Okay, so I'm gonna bump it up to express to the top floor. What the heck is going on? Well, there's 2 tonics in the major scale relative to Do, relative to the one we're relating to. Because remember, the major scale kind of took over the church modes, I believe, in the 15th century or something like that, and became the primary scale of Western music. So it was designed to give us functional harmony, among other things.
Sure.
But to give us this sort of dominant tonic relationship, or in jazz terms, 2-5-1, all right, or subdominant, dominant tonic. All right. So the first 4 notes of sounding F, well, you look at it, okay, so what is that interval of a fourth? Well, it's an inverted fifth. And then you think, the idea behind it is, oh, then there's a definite connection to the overtone series, because in the overtone series, as I'm sure you know as a trumpet player, if you play a fundamental, well, the first partial that you hear is the F, is the octave. I'll just play it like this. You hear it ring pretty well.
Cool, yeah.
And then, yeah, nice, huh? Okay,
Yep,
and
pretty
then
good.
I'm just going to hold that C down, and I'm going to go, and you hear that, you hear that ringing.
Sure.
All right, so, Pythagoras knew this. And the fifth is the basic unit of what George termed tonal gravity. And that's the big idea behind the Lydian concept, is that it unites, it takes an understanding of organization really from science and the overtone series, but it starts with a vertical premise, meaning this. It means that a ladder of 6 intervals of fifths is a vertical tonal gravity field in which the tonic of a fifth being the lower tone, it goes all the way down to the lowest tone, and there is only one center of gravity, or sun, George would like to say, or Lydian tonic. The Lydian scale is not going anywhere. It just sort of is.
Yeah.
It's one of the authentic modes, too. All right. Now, if you take that Lydian scale and you put it in thirds, look what you get. You get a F major 13 sharp 11 chord. But let's just take out the 4 notes on top. You get F major. So wouldn't it make logical sense, if A equals B equals C, that F major is the same as F Lydian? Okay, not asking you to believe that, but let's just take that as a premise, that really an F major chord is primarily a representative of F Lydian. Okay, if that's the case.
And now just to slow down a little bit, so you're getting
please.
there by stacking, because the fifth being the first interval in the overtone series after the fundamental and the octave, you're now using that as the lower of the fifths is going to be the tonic, and so you're building the scale on those fifths so that you get the 7 notes in the Lydian mode.
Well, I'm understanding that's where they came from, but I could play them any way I want. I could play all white,
Yeah, but the construction of the scale is coming from the understanding that the first fifth in the overtone series is giving it a tonicization to that. lower tone.
Exactly.
Sure. So what we're dealing with here is really looking at it in terms of its roots in the overtone series.
Yeah, coming from the strongest harmonic interval, that basic unit of measurement is of the fifth.
Sure.
So, Okay, I think
All right,
we're...
carry on. Back to where we were.
All right. Well, I think we're on floor 20 of 38. We'll see
Yeah.
where we end up. Okay. All right. So what the heck is going on in the major scale? If the vertical tonic of the C major scale, which is really F Lydian, is F, it's related to C. So why does it resolve to C? Mm-hmm. Well, because think about it. If an F major chord really is an F Lydian scale, with or without all of the other notes of the scale, then a C major chord would be C Lydian, right?
Sure.
So, and in C Lydian, check it out. There's no F.
Sure.
It's an F sharp. It's a 7-tone, or I believe you could say diatonic, self-contained tonal gravity field in which C is the center of gravity. And, C Lydian is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of times bebop musicians knew that, and they would end songs on the sharp 4. It gives us absolute finality. It's like, that's it, end of story, right?
Yeah.
You're done.
And I'll tell you, that was something that I had to grapple with in the beginning a little bit, taking your class, is because we're so used to a major scale resolving to the tonic that when you start playing with the Lydian mode, it doesn't have the same forward momentum that brings you to the tonic. So
it's so wimpy. It's so wimpy. I've been
well,
really.
I don't know.
No, it is. It's Lydian. Here's something that's so misunderstood. I mean, most of the stuff on the internet is misunderstands and totally overcomplicates this. Mm-hmm. The Lydian stuff is, you can make melodies, beautiful melodies, really even New Age or Disney style melodies if you want with it.
Sure, yeah.
But Lydian stuff just informs how chords are voiced and where they come from.
Sure.
It's what's called the horizontal relationship between chords that explains how they're behaving. So let's go. Can we go back to C major scale just for a second?
Yeah,
All
sure.
Right, so you got, excuse me, two vertical entities. You have got subdominant F major on 4. You got a nice amen.
Sure.
Cool. Why does it resolve? Now, I have a feeling that you might know, Bobby.
I do.
But I know you do. but
for the people at home.
Okay, we're at floor 26. We're making good progress.
Right.
Okay. Well, think about a circle of keys. Well, there's a circle of keys, and then here is the one you're relating to, so it's C. And then in a sharp direction, going up is oh, I'm sorry. No, in a flat direction is F. So in other words, C, F, then B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat. It's kind of fun. And then the sharp direction would be G, G, D, A, E, B. Okay, enough. But let's just work with just the C and the F. You following?
Following.
What I'm doing?
Gotcha. Yep.
We're getting creative during this coronavirus thing.
Of course. So we've got the circle of fifths.
Yeah. So what happens? We start on Do, on C, and we go down 1/5 to F Lydian. And then we can take our G7 chord, which, believe it or not, is G7 is really F Lydian mode 2. Now this gets into the whole idea of modes, and what George discovered is that chords can be looked at. He clarified the idea that chords are modes.
Yeah, for him, chords were modes. It wasn't playing modes over chords so much as it was their unified system.
It's their unified organization. That said, of course, you can play all kinds of any mode over any chord, and that's all explainable too down the line. On the 432nd floor. So, But let's keep it down under 100 and go to why that resolves. Why does G7 or F major resolve to C? Because the center of gravity of G major or F7, or for that matter D minor, because you can't have D minor without F. You take an F Lydian scale. You put it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You put it 6th degree in the bass, and you get a nice Dorian minor. You know? Not going anywhere.
Sure.
So, I got a little sidetracked there. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So we have subdominant, dominant, tonic. Okay, the center of tonal gravity of the subdominant is F. The center of gravity of a G7 is F. But watch what happens when we go to C. That F is canceled.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that you can't still play it. And in a way, it becomes even more important melodically because it strengthens this idea of resolution. So, to cut this a little bit short, resolution, final sounding resolution, happens because the vertical components in the major scale, this would be the subdominant and dominant, or the 2 chord,
Sure.
resolve 1/5 in a sharp direction to the C major chord or the A minor chord. Because A minor would be C Lydian as well, with or without an F sharp.
Sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
there's two concepts combined in there that I think maybe just to go over it to clarify it.
Sure.
One is the idea that, and this is following up on what you started with, but the idea that the major scale and the sound of the major scale is the internal resolution, 1/5 in a sharp direction.
yeah, the sound of the major scale represents the horizontal, goal-seeking, resolving. It's the sound of resolving to the tonic in its
Right.
most basic way.
And that's the difference between maybe the role of the major scale and the role of the Lydian mode or the Lydian scale, depending on how you want to look at it. In that context, is the Lydian. Now we've, moving 1/5 in sharp direction. Okay, we've resolved. The other thing that I think is helpful for people to visualize this is the idea that, and I'm sure you'll get to this, but the idea that all of what we know in conventional music is all works within this, what I'm going to call a paradigm. But the idea is that the perspective changes. So as an example, like when I try to explain this to people, oftentimes I'll use a 2-5-1 as an example, where in conventional music theory, we would think of a 2-5-1 as being the 2 of the major scale, 5 of the major scale, 1 of the major scale. But the way that you're describing it is, it's the 6 of the Lydian to the 2 of the Lydian, resolving 1/5 in a sharp direction to the 1 of the Lydian. So it's the 6th mode of F to the 2nd mode of F, resolving to the 1st mode of C Lydian.
Yeah, and then I'm going to throw something in that I'm going to start throwing in a lot more sooner than
Sure.
I was when we were working together. You were in my class. Is that right away I can say, well, C major could also be considered 5 horizontal of F Lydian. What do I mean by that? I mean that mode, the 5th mode of F Lydian, which, yes, it's C Ionian, has a vertical identity, which would just be C sus, or F over C. And then it also has C major. But that mode, that 5th mode, in context of a C major chord, sounds horizontal. It sounds forward moving.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's both. It's both.
Right.
But the thing to differentiate is that from this perspective, the real organization is being understood as coming from the vertical. In other words, the vertical is explaining the horizontal, explaining resolution, not just 1/5, but any direction, flat, sharp, and 1 to 6/5 flat, or 1 to 5/5 sharp.
Sure. I often think about that with that Tad Dameron turnaround on
Lady Bird?
Ladybird, exactly. And that works within, if you look at where those chords are in the circle of fifths, it's the same principle, except instead of moving 1/5 in a sharp direction, now you're moving whatever it is, 6/5 to, or, however many, whatever, 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 or something like that.
Anyways, we can look at that later.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've covered now the first 7 tones. If you're starting from the tonic of an F and you're moving up to what makes it the sort of foundation of the Lydian mode as the center of the concept, right?
Yeah. That
We've started with, now we've gone up in fifths. We've started on F. We've gone up in fifths all the way. Now we get Lydian. Now, let me know if you think I'm jumping ahead here too far. But what happens when you go beyond that 7th note?
Well, you start kind of getting at odds with equal temperament a little bit, because what equal temperament did, as you know, is it tempered each of the distances between semitones to 100 cents.
Sure.
So even though it can sound really, really cool to go, that sounds great.
Sure.
But if you were to play play that flat 2 against the C major chord or against an A minor chord, you'd have major third or a 7th chord. You have a 7th chord with a major 7th. So you have to look historically. I'll tell you what I understood George Russell to do. He was not looking to be an academic theorist by any means. He was just trying to find answers to questions that he couldn't find in traditional Western music theory.
Sure.
But he knew that the 5 main types of chords were major, minor, and 7th, which Lydian all gives you on 1, 6, and 2, respectively, and then augmented and diminished. So if you just take that next 5th, which would be the flat 2, and say, okay, let's wait on that one, but let's go up to the next one, well, then you do get the augmented. And that gives us augmented major chords on 1. It also gives us minor major 7ths on 6, and it also gives us 7th chords with sharp 11s.
Sure.
Very, very common alterations or colors that are added to those chords. And then after that, after the sharp 5, you get a flat 3rd, which gives us diminished, and diminished. We know there's only really 3 diminished chords on the piano, but you, in a tonical way, diminished now can be looked at as accommodated by the 9th tone in the Lydian chromatic order.
Sure. So now, to recap here, just so we're all following.
Sure.
The order, what we're talking about is the Lydian chromatic, the order of tonal gravity.
Yeah.
So if we start at F as the tonic, because we're having fun here, and it's all white keys, and you can look at it on the piano. We've got F. Next up as a 5th is C, then G, D, A, E, B, and that gives you the Lydian mode. Now we're going to skip the flat 9 because that doesn't fall in line with the F as being the tonic and within an equal tempered system. So we're skipping a 5th and now going up to C sharp, which is going to create the Lydian augmented parent scale. Yeah. So then that gives us, where the Lydian mode would give us all of the modes that we would conventionally call the major modes. Now the Lydian augmented, still based fundamentally on the Lydian scale, is going to give us all of the modes of what we would call melodic minor, which we use all the time.
Yeah. Sure. Yep.
So so again, you're still using all the same modes that you would. I mean, you're thinking about it as all the same modes in melodic minor, but now instead of thinking of the root as or the parent scale, let's say, as being the melodic minor scale, now you're thinking of it as being the Lydian augmented scale, which is Lydian with the sharp 5 on it.
Yep.
And you can do the same thing if you go up another 5th. Now instead of the C sharp, now you've got an A flat. You've got the flat 3rd on there, and that gives you another whole series of modes.
Yes.
And you can do the same thing with the whole collection of the 12 notes.
Yeah, but we don't need to necessarily keep going, especially for this discussion. Maybe at a later time.
But to have the concept in the back of one's mind is because I think one of the things that I find particularly useful about it is oftentimes when, let's say, as an improviser, the world that I live in is kind of an inside-outside world where I want to be able to play free music, and I also want to be able to play, standards or whatever. And to me, a lot of this stuff really bridges the gap. Instead of just saying, oh, you're playing either inside or outside, now it gives you this whole spectrum of possibilities from in to out. And if you understand that the 12 tones, you can go all the way to that 12th tone, and that gives you a certain color that you're working with. So somebody like Eric Dolphy might be working with all 12 tones in the, based on that fundamental, or 11 tones or 10 tones or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can look at it as being this whole wide perspective from in to out.
Yes.
And that's something that it occurs to me that in conventional theory, it's often you have an understanding that, okay, this is an out note, this is a dissonant note, we're using different keys, we're playing keys over keys or whatever, but you don't have such a sort of fluid connection between those two worlds as you might, thinking of it from this perspective.
Yeah, I think everybody intuitively knows that you could do anything. We're free to play any notes they want. But the idea that actually there is a logical organization between all tonal resources of equal temperament, that's what the ideas of the Lydian chromatic concept, seek to explain. So, yeah.
Sure. And this has been, that's been a lot of the use, or a lot of the way that I think about these things is that it has all the connections between various different styles of music that may not otherwise fall under the Western paradigm as well. If this is based in physics, in the physics of sound, in the overtone series in the fifths, all of a sudden you can apply this now not only to, let's say, Western music, which certainly it also applies to, but also, in my experience, let's say, I've used it in Ethiopian music, or you can look at 12-tone music, you can look at Schoenberg's music, and everything is sort of explained within this umbrella that otherwise you have to sort of create new concepts from sort of conventional theory to explain.
I would, you're right. I would make one really, really important clarification about the concept. The concept is not a method. The concept is not a recipe. It is not, like I have had students over the years saying, "Oh, you'd love this. It's so Lydian." Frankly, the Lydian sound, like I said, it's kind of whitewashed if it's overused. A little too many sharp 11s. That's just not my cup of tea. I'll throw sharp 11s in chord voicings left and right, but in terms of, anyways, blah, blah. So everything, like you say, can be understood from this perspective. If that's so, then really what the Lydian concept, organic music theory, seeks to explain are the ingredients, the elements. And so then history, the rich history of not just jazz, but classical and, Ethiopian and Brazilian and world musics, all of those beautiful composers and musicians, they are the chefs. They are the recipe makers. That is music history, and those are beautiful things to study and to transcribe and to understand. But the Lydian concept doesn't tell you what to write or how to write.
Sure. Yeah.
and I might have to I just want to underscore that's precisely the reason that I really dig teaching it and working with it, because I don't feel like I'm, imposing any stylistic requirement on myself or students as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think of it as being descriptive rather than prescriptive or something.
Yeah.
Or the idea that, all right, this is a way you can look at this, but it doesn't mean that then you have to write or play or do anything any differently. Or that it recommends anything in the same way that you might get from classical.
At the risk of jumping ahead too much, I mean, this is on my piano. This is that's a Bach chorale.
Yeah.
Guess what? Bach chorales I don't think that Johann was using Lydian chromatic concept, but damn, I think there's a whole lot of A flat Lydian happening here. So here's. That's Lydian diminished, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Also. But those chords, the chords are C minor is really E flat Lydian, E flat, C minor over E flat, which is still E flat Lydian, and there's G major. But guess what? G major is G Lydian, but he's playing it within the context of A flat. And like you had inferred earlier, what relationship does A flat have to G? Well, it is 5/5 flat, bro. So. We know that resolution from, all kinds of music from around the world. But how beautiful it is to just understand that G major, even though it comes from, I mean, if I just play straight up Lydian, sounds kind of cool. Sounds almost weather reporty. But if I go, we hear it all coming from the same scale. But certain modes are, like I mentioned earlier, are vertical, certain modes are horizontal. And this idea of vertical resolving to horizontal is what I think the concept does a beautiful job of offering a different perspective.
Sure. Do you want to go into the various levels of tonal gravity?
Sure.
Do you think we're getting too far? I think we could do it. I think we could dip our toes in there a little bit.
Well, Bobby, I'm gonna let you kind of direct the questioning here.
Sure. Now, if there's anything that you think we've left out that would be I mean, this is an endless well of knowledge here, so there's no way we're gonna get, But I mean, at this point, in terms of your perspective on an overview in some regard. But you have, go on.
I was just going to say, at this point, maybe your listeners should press pause and go have a drink of water, or
yeah, exactly,
a breath of fresh air. But anyways,
yeah. So you can think about these things as maybe a way to introduce this would be to say, it seems to me that the whole of, let's say, the concept operates in sort of concentric circles, whereas maybe the first thing that you can think of is just the note unto itself. Like a note is dealing with the overtone series within that one note. And then from there, you can think of it as a collection of notes. Let's say a vertical collection of notes. Mm-hmm. All right, if you build on that one note, you might get the Lydian mode. And then from there, incorporating that into an entire piece of music, now you've got the contrast between these different, the motion from one mode to another around the circle of fifths or whatever. And then you have like the entire piece, or a whole, let's say, series of pieces even. You could think of it as sort of a macro concept made of these smaller component parts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's break that down. Yes. What you're basically saying is there's basically three types of gravity centering elements.
Sure.
Now, I'm gonna just give a side note. One reason that the concept has been so difficult for so many people, myself included, to understand is the terminology. I get it.
Sure.
It's because the terminology arose from George because there was no words to really describe that he could find to describe it, and also, it was during the space age, so it's you got some cool terms.
Yeah,
here.
you gotta throw the Jetsons terms.
You got a little bit, and that's awesome. That's awesome. I love it.
Totally.
It's space-like, jazz in the space age. Okay, so.
But the most important, if I can interrupt briefly, the most important, I think, is understanding that the gravity concept. The gravity as a term, I think, is central. We
got three different types of levers on our gravity spaceship. All right, so we're gonna go to this. We're gonna.
Perfect.
I know you like that, don't you? All right, so let's look at three different things to center melody on, for instance, okay? Let's center the melody on the chord. Well, that would be the vertical tonal gravity centering element. So every single chord has its organization, has its vertical organization. You know, and if you construct a melody, say you're going down the river of all the things you are. There's a beautiful chart called the River Trip in the original version, and actually the later version of the Lydian Chromatic concept. Talks about how Coleman Hawkins represents this local, stopping at each chord town. So he's playing, you know. In his own way, of course, but he's he's relating to A flat major and then D flat major. I'm sorry. B flat minor, and then E flat 7, A flat, and so on.
And this is really the foundation of how we are oftentimes in jazz education, for better or worse. This is how we're taught to think of it as chord. Here's a mode over this chord. Here's a mode over this chord, moving through the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was taught.
Sure.
You know, even at Michigan State, studying with Ron Newman, I learned all my stock voicings and ways to play through changes. I mean, it's invaluable, helping me get through standards, especially with all the playing I was doing back then and still am. But what I was going to say is that that's the vertical way of thinking, is understanding an organization of the chord. And a lot of times, and you mentioned jazz education, one thing that I think is a big thing is are like guide tones, chord tones, and like working around certain chord tones within a chord progression. This is kind of a vertical activity, because you're looking at a chord, you're going, okay, I'm going to really like land on this chord, I'm going to land on this chord, but I'm going to do it in a crafty way. Awesome. Okay, so that's vertical. But guess what? Chords go places. The Lydian doesn't go anywhere, just like the church modes don't really go anywhere. If you listen to Gregorian chant, they just float, right? But chord progressions in Western music, dominant tonics type of stuff, they move, and they are written in major and minor keys, and those major and minor keys are really not Lydian major or minor; they're major scale minor and minor scale minor.
Sure.
So they represent tonic stations, and that harmony traditionally tonicizes those tonic stations. This behavior of relating, in this case melodically, to a tonic station is what George termed horizontal tonal gravity. It happens concurrently. You can't have horizontal without vertical. In other words, horizontal is more than a few things. It's a number of things and the relationship between them. You could think about vertical as being the existence of a single thing, and horizontal as being relationships.
Sure.
And George would go as far to say that's not just in music, but in life. You know, you can have goals, but everything is made up of individual vertical elements. So you get as philosophically corresponding about this as you want. Maybe that's good for another time.
Well, I don't know if you can get because he did have I want to get into this, but he did have a nature of really relating a lot of this stuff back to sort of greater philosophical ideas as well.
It's true. He would say if it makes sense in music, it's got to make sense in other fields, in other disciplines, in nature. And you look at it, think about the tonal gravity field, say, of the Lydian scale, and let's look at the solar system. Well, guess what? The Earth is not the center of the solar system, it's the sun, even though a lot of us would like to think that the Earth is the center, but the gravity is with the sun.
Right.
So, but our horizontal center of gravity is the Earth, because we want to see the Earth survive, especially now that everything's shut down until who knows when.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Great. And then, so now let's say, well, what's the best way to put this? Let's ease them in. This might be as far out as we can take people getting used to this. But so then the finally you get supravertical.
Ooh, wow, supra. Awesome. Sounds like a Greek god. It's true. It means overall, like the eonic state. But you mentioned it in terms of like a whole section or a form, you know. So the organization of the whole music, much in the same way, you know, you take a look at this, Bach chorale. Well, it's written in the key of E flat major. Is that right? No, it's written in the key of B flat major. Sorry. I broke it down into Lydian. So I broke it down into Lydian stuff, so that gave me all my vertical modes. So I can actually blow through these changes, improvising, coming up with my own stuff. It's not going to sound anything like Bach unless I use some of his recipes, which I would probably not do, but you never know. I'm free to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, man, there are a lot of resolutions happening here. Every other chord or every few chords, there's a lot of resolutions. And we hear those resolutions, you know? We hear that motion.
Right.
And
that's what gives it
that's horizontal.
Yeah.
Okay, but check it out. And then he goes, all right, it starts in C minor, right? Mm-hmm. It starts in C minor. And, you know, that means like the overall tonic station of the whole thing could be looked at as C minor, all right? Even though we resolved to different keys. Oops, I'm sorry. All right, and so forth. And then he finally ends with that nice Picardy major at the end.
Yeah.
We heard that C major is sounding like, wow, so bright. Why does it sound bright? Bobby?
Because we're moving 3/5 in a sharp direction.
Wow, you got it. That's exactly it. Yeah, and when you move from C major, well, look what happened to that E flat. E flat got whacked, vertically speaking, right? So the vertical exists within the exists within the horizontal, exists within the super vertical. But listen how beautiful it is if we don't just all of a sudden go, I'm going to go G. There's a G sus, and then I'm going to go. I'm not going C Lydian, but I'm going this, but I'm going. You hear that mode. You're still hearing this really strong sense of a tonic, but you're hearing this context. But I'm relating to it vertical. This is what George termed verticalized horizontal chord modes. Ah! But
get in the weeds. Yeah.
Well, but the thing is, I think that these are super important to know because otherwise everything's just this whitewashy vertical Lydian world.
Right.
You know,
and that's not the world that we live in.
I don't think so. We live in the world with the people being told to inject bleach. So, I'm sorry. Yeah, we live with different types of goal orientation. We need to accommodate.
Yeah.
So,
all right. That's a pretty strong overview. I think we've
that was a
covered
little
lot
stronger
of
than I was planning to say. But go ahead. Yeah.
Great. Let me ask you this. I'm sure that over the years of teaching this, you've run into a lot of misconceptions about this because nobody knows anything about it. Everybody's read the liner notes to Kind of Blue, and they understand that this is a thing that has existed and it has had an influence on it. Mm-hmm. What are some of the misconceptions that you hear from people related to this?
I think that you can do that or you can't do this.
Yeah.
That takes it out of the premise. And one of the biggest problems that people have who start to study it is they buy into this whole Lydian thing, unity, and then all of a sudden horizontal tonal gravity comes around, and they're trying to like put horizontal into a vertical container. But the fact is it's concentric. You know, you have moments in time, you have individual ingredients like paprika or garlic or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But then you have recipes, and recipes are the relationship of the ingredients coming towards the tonical whatever you're making, right? Mm-hmm. So,
It's the idea
Thinking
that
there's both. You're in the moment, so you understand each vertical element. At the same time, you understand relationships and the goals that are being set up and arrived at, either with preconceived ways, like a recipe or a puzzle that you put together. A lot of times, jazz education at the beginning is taught more like a bunch of puzzle pieces that you can use to get through pieces with certain solutions. But ultimately, they both exist at the same time.
Sure.
Vertical and horizontal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I think the other thing is that this is something that applies to. I think you're speaking to this, but it applies to any style of music or any approach of music in that respect. It's like it's all kind of encompassed into the same thing. It isn't
right.
Like,
yeah.
And again, that comes back to the idea that it's descriptive rather than prescriptive, or that all right, this is coming from sort of all traditions in a certain way.
Yeah, if you look at, you break apart a piece like Rites of Spring, or Scriabin's Prometheus, Song of Fire, or so many other pieces, you see that there's these vertical modal components, and then there's also these horizontal areas as well. And then there's an overall understanding of the key, whether it's in 12-tone music or whatever. There's always going to be some behavior of things relative to an overall tonic, to overall organization, relative to different tonic stations or goals that are happening, and to each vertical element. So it all potentially happens at the same time. The level of tonal gravity you're on is determined by what you're relating to melodically at the moment.
Sure.
So you could say, back to the river trip, that Coleman Hawkins is on the level of vertical tonal gravity. He's relating to the chord. I said Coleman Hawkins, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Lester Young, for example, would be on the level, oftentimes, of horizontal tonal gravity. His longer melodies would not necessarily, sink into each one of the chords that were happening, but rather relate to the larger tonic station that happened along the chord stream.
Yeah. And then if you get, let's say you have like an Ornette Coleman as an example.
He's taking a rocket ship, and he's relating to the reality that everything is contained within anything. So within the A-flat Lydian chromatic scale, he can play... can play anything over, whatever chord is happening.
Sure. And that's the chromatic part in Lydian chromatic, isn't it?
That has to do with I think Ornette would be less chromatic than pantonic.
Sure. But what I mean to say is, and we're not getting into that. That's
Bobby,
you're
covering a lot of material for...
All right, we'll call it a day on that. But just the idea that when you say Lydian chromatic, the Lydian part everybody gets, because you're moving up in fifths, you create the parent scale from fifths, and then the chromatic part is that it also going up far enough, you get all of the 12 notes in the whatever Western scale, chromatic scale. Yeah,
that's true.
Have you ever tried to relate this, or do you know of anybody who's tried to relate it to, let's say, quarter tone music or Indian music or things outside of the Western tradition? Because I realize that it's certainly rooted in the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, and I think it makes sense that it would be. But has anybody ever tried to relate this outside of that tradition?
Possibly. Harry Partch did a lot of cool stuff, making instruments and things.
Dave
Kaczynski, good friend, has beautiful quarter micro guitar stuff that he does. He worked with George Russell for a while, but I think, that's a whole nother lifetime of research right there. I think basically you could think that tonal gravity affects the way everything is organized, not just in music, but on, in life. Gravity. George would say, he goes, "You want to argue with gravity? Just step outside that window." So
sure. Yeah. That's the related
old school, but
no doubt. Awesome. Yeah. And so you have your book Organic Music Theory. Mm-hmm. And that came out how many years ago did that come out?
2017.
Okay, right. And this is sort of the culmination of the work that you've done teaching this at NEC and elsewhere.
Yeah, this is my attempt to explain the ideas that have been taught at NEC and elsewhere that are behind the Lydian Chromatics concept. Just in my own words, in a way that hopefully can demystify it, and at the same time give real a much more clearer understanding. And a clearer understanding of its origins and the contributions that George Russell gave.
Sure. And it's a great book. I think you did a great job of not only, I think, clarifying a lot of the stuff, but also it being, I think it comes out in your own voice. Like it is a very, I think, approachable thing because you speak in your own terms. You as a person are not an overtly academic style. Like you're not coming in here in a tweed jacket or whatever, telling us what we have to think or anything like that.
No,
you've got a very open perception on it. So, but I think it comes out in the book, and it's a comprehensive approach to this.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to check this stuff out, there's a whole wide thing, but of course there's the Lydian Chromatic concept of tonal organization, George Russell's book, and then also organic music theory covers some of these things, maybe from a slightly different perspective, but from your own experience in music and sort of on a grand scale.
Yeah. Organic music theory does cover things like horizontal tonal gravity and supervertical tonal gravity and other broader applications, pedagogical and outside of music as well.
Yeah.
Like I say, the first book of the Lydian Chromatic concept is basically an understanding of vertical tonal gravity. So it's a rewriting of the first edition.
Yeah.
So I thought that because this whole idea of horizontal, the stuff we covered about, about this sharp and flat relationship, I think these ideas need to be clarified so that there's no confusion about how everything is connected.
Sure, no doubt, yeah. And then one of the most interesting things is I think that it might be part 2, the second section. You talk about let's say, I don't know exactly the way that I would put it as a foundation, but these concepts then being applied to a sort of greater creative field. So when you're teaching at Boston University, you're not talking about music theory necessarily for its own sake, but rather as it applies to a sort of greater artistic or creative disciplines.
Yeah,
right?
This would actually be UMass Boston, but
UMass Boston. What did I say?
Boston University. But,
I'm sorry. Then. My
so it's all right.
Yeah, UMass Boston. I know that.
So in 2000, I met Peter Taylor, who unfortunately passed away late last year. He started the Creative and Critical Thinking department at UMass Boston. I met him because a friend of his, Brad Bellows, has triplets who were at that time. I started teaching them when they were 8 years old until they were just about ready to go off to college. We would have recitals at our house, and much in the same way that the concept doesn't legislate taste, I would kind of facilitate teaching kids in a way.
Sure.
So that everyone was writing their own music and creating their own. I was just working with each one of them to help them create unique music for themselves. At the same time, learning about music and ear training and historical languages and all that stuff. Okay, so anyways, we had very entertaining concerts here of original music.
I remember a couple of them.
Amazing. And then we would have guest artists. George Russell came many times. Also, Rand Blake performed. Joe Maneri performed. David Azarian, when he was alive, he performed. Mark Rossi, Diana Fisher. And others. But at one of these, Brad Bellows came, and he was really, Brad Bellows, Peter Taylor came with Brad, and Peter said, who's always such an inquisitive, beautiful guy. He immediately saw that, wow, this would be a really great thing to somehow design a class for this department, this creative and critical thinking department, and he asked me if I would give a stab at it, and I said, well, Peter, I just had a bachelor's in jazz composition. He goes, I think you just give it a stab and see what you can do. And I did. I designed a class for non-musicians based on this idea of vertical and horizontal tonal gravity. The idea that, okay, what do you want to create? You create anything you want to, but then let's break it apart into elements. And lo and behold, what my thought is that myself and many others, when we want to create something, the first thing we do is try to look for an instruction manual. And this is important to do, obviously, right? But at the same time, if we really want to create something uniquely of our own ownership, aren't we going to understand really each of the ingredients that makes up the recipe or the design or whatever?
Sure.
And in that way, even streamline and have more conscious control over what goes into it, and perhaps even be more efficient in conveying whatever it is. An idea could be a book, a business, a website, a basketball coaching thing, a pedagogy, whatever. Anyways,
Sure.
that's been running since every other year since 2000, and and it's all dialogue based. All of all of these classes, including the Lydian concept, are all basically dialogue based, where we're all working together at the same time as individuals, creating unique works of our own.
Yeah. And that's what you want. You want to have the dialogue between different. That's how new ideas come about. Is people bouncing different concepts off each other and trying.
Yeah,
out
I don't think
things
this is not unique to my style of teaching. There's lots of other teachers and people who do this as well. So this is not a unique approach. This is just kind of going rather than a. It's I would say that the essence of the book, Organic Music Theory, is that creativity is just choice. So are you choosing from recipes? Are you choosing from ingredients? Are you choosing from a combination of both? And just realizing the freedom. So anybody who's ever made choices is inherently creative.
Sure.
So that goes that you can say, okay, well, most everybody makes choices. So what about talent? And you could think, well, talent is a myth.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's a kind of a neat way to approach everybody.
Yeah,
is to say you're all talented. You're making choices.
Yeah.
Let
me ask you this from a educational perspective: do you think about how do you bridge the gap, or let me put it like this: how do you balance allowing people to be creative or trying to maximize their creativity or encourage their creativity, and also the sort of sometimes rigid discipline required to just be a good piano player or be a good anything?
I think what I've learned from my teachers and experience to some degree is that it's consciousness, just being conscious of what you're doing. If your hand positions it as a certain way when you're playing, are you conscious of that? Are you conscious of the length of the notes? Are you conscious of how you're working the pedal? Are you conscious of, if you're playing a jazz standard, do you really need to play this similar voicing throughout the whole thing? Or do we have other choices? Breaking it down. So understanding each element that is into it.
And then it's just a matter of trying to do what it takes in order to be comfortable in whatever choices you make. If I want to be able to play high notes, if I'm consciously thinking in terms of, oh, this is a choice I want to make, I then have to sit and practice this stuff in order to get stuff to come out.
Just thinking about it, being conscious of it is just, kind of like wishful thinking. So,
But as a teacher, then you have to say, all right, but listen, we got to take out this metronome and get this together. Or how do you approach it? Because you seem to be more in line with the sort of encouraging people's creative invention.
I kind of prescribe to the idea that if people are creating things that they really own, they're going to not feel like they got a job to do. And then that makes my work much more effortless because people care more about what they're doing. I mean, look what you did. You would come in with works about all kinds of crazy stuff, but it was your ownership. And now you've got a great big band, and you got an album coming out hopefully in May.
Yep. So it'll come out. Whether we'll have all the pieces together, we don't know. But we'll see what happens.
And you got a lot of stuff happening.
You try. All right, I got one for you. I got a question. I got to read it, though. I got to read this one, okay? All right. What is Ichinen Sanzen? Did I say that right? And how does that apply?
Sanzen.
How does that have? What does that have to do with
That
Lydian
would be
chromatic concept?
more of a an understanding that 3,000 life conditions exist in the same moment. That's a Buddhist philosophy,
Sure.
Buddhist concept.
How do you apply that? Do you think about it?
Well, how do I apply it? I mean, I
Like,
think.
how do you think about that in the context, in the Lydian chromatic context?
Well, okay, in a very feeble way, I'll try to do that. I would look at it as a supravertical reality, the idea that everything exists within one thing, or one thing has the potential for everything else. You know,
Sure.
If you want to break it down, what Ichen and Sanzen is, I think there's something in my book that explains it a bit.
Yeah.
10 worlds and 3 realms and the 10 times 10 and.
Yeah. Well, check it out, everybody who's listening. Check it out because it's cool. I wanted to see if I get you on that.
I
one,
mean,
but-
I will say one thing that was really attractive to me. I studied concept for, I came here in '82, and then in 1986, I met a wonderful bass player named Dave Zox, and he introduced me to Nichiren Buddhism, and I started chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and I joined the Soka Gakkai, and I've been, very involved with the Buddhist practice since then,
Sure.
and the community. And I find that the philosophy is much in line with science. I find science and reason to be kind of refreshingly creative and interactive,
Sure.
but also commanding respect.
Sure. Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, and also I think that this idea that we have this inherent, we are microcosms of a macrocosm, that would have something that would have an essence of that Ichen and Sanzen concept as well.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate in many regards how a lot of and certainly not just with this, but how many of these musical concepts will relate to a sort of larger
Yeah,
field,
me too.
And you're in that world, especially. I mean, I wanted to get you down the road a little bit into you're studying Buddhism and your the relationship between those things, but. Yeah, so it's really interesting to get into these concentric, circles and what have you. All right, now is there a way? Do you think about? Let me say it like this: so you have a trio. You've got a series of different, really interesting organizations that you'll do. You work with dancers and you work as a solo and duo and everything. You're doing a lot with synthesizers and you've got all these groups that you're putting together. As you're playing and composing, is all of this sort of theoretical component to this, which is your wheelhouse, is it in the back of your mind and you're using your intuition, or how might you use this information that you've built on for so many years?
I think what the biggest benefit is ear training and learning the geography. So I might go run out in the woods, and if I know the woods, I'm going to maybe do something different every time. I'm not going to really think about how well I know the woods, but I'm just going to kind of interact with what's around there. And I'll probably discover things that I don't really understand, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So if I'm sitting down, I'm playing, if I'm improvising, if I'm jamming with Kenwood Denard and Mark Friedman, the Mobile Trio, man, I am not really thinking theoretically at all. I'm mostly thinking ears and distance and connections and macro, and maybe we'll be jamming in one key-ish in different rhythmic gravities, because the concept explains rhythmic gravity as well. We're not going to get into this now, Bobby. No.
Right, yes.
Okay. And then, but I might just say, wow, okay, everybody's kind of like in the land of E-flat minor, but I'm going to just kind of go somewhere in A, blues, and just do something there. But then I'm going to maybe use some movable chromatic interval structures, or maybe I'll, in other words, but I'm not going to say that to myself. I'm just going to end up doing it.
Right, but it's something that's been internalized in you as the way to kind of view some of these things. You're thinking about I
think so.
You have that as options in the same way that we have, as we learn some kind of vocabulary or as we build on our abilities, we have these options.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pretty good. Well, now we're all locked indoors here, unfortunately, for the next little while.
For a
or at
minute,
least
yeah.
away from other people. I guess you've been lucky to get outside and be able to travel the world here. But do you have any projects coming up? What have you been working on? What's been your focus as an artist?
My focus has really been back to Bach. I have been analyzing for 2 years Bach chorales and fugues and motets because I know that there's something there and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it. And so what I've discovered recently, working with another student, Henry Gottfried, was this idea of multidimensional, vertical, contextual analysis.
Okay.
So what that means is much in the same way we were talking C minor as E flat Lydian, but it could also be the 3 horizontal of A flat and so forth and so on. We can go into standards. We can go into other, basic chord progressions. Take a real book, for instance, and apply it that way. We know darn well if the thing's in the key of E flat that the first chord is related to the E flat major scale and not E flat Lydian. I get it, right? So, but I'm not going to voice an E flat major chord with an A flat in it. Because I kind of know that the F minor chord is going to come real soon.
Sure. Yeah. I got
so
you.
That's a very basic way. But you see, if you take the Lydian, going back to one of the first topics, the Lydian Augmented, Lydian Diminished, hey man, you just break it out, all of those modes down, and you can see, there's all these beautiful major, minor, seventh chords, diminished chords, augmented chords that can be related on those degrees, that are created on those degrees. But because their vertical source is whatever, the A flat Lydian Augmented or the D Lydian Diminished or the C Lydian or whatever, that explains the context that they're going to have, whether they're vertical or horizontal. So then your navigation through a chord changes, becomes like a creative journey of choice. And rather than knowing what a bunch of notes sound good with certain chords, you understand this multi-dimensional, vertical, contextual, what did I call it? Contextual analysis. Something
Sure.
like that. Anyways, but just working with Bach, this is a fugue, and that's being able to read through that and find a way to apply it. Been working on that.
Now, is what's driving you forward on this the acquisition of knowledge, or do you think about these things as being a means to an end, where the end is a creation of a new thing?
Well, I'm already looking towards the next project because I think that I'm going to wrap it up with this last fugue that I did, a fugue 14 from the Well-Tempered Clavier. I'm not going to wrap it up, and I'm teaching a class on modal analysis at Launchie that starts next year, Launchie School of Music. What it's done is it's really helped me to bridge the gap between traditional Western music theory and this understanding and historical practices. And it's super trained my ears, and my goodness, Bach is you can learn so much from him. It's endless. It's mind-blowing.
Sure.
That said, I'm got a whole bunch of synthesizers, like you said, and I've been kind of grooving on a bunch of analog stuff. And and then also working with my friend Angelo Dello Iacono in Switzerland. Going to be on tour with a show that we created called No Plan B next year, if the world's open.
Sure.
We'll be performing.
When's that scheduled for?
That's scheduled for a year from now in the spring.
Okay.
So
we keep our fingers crossed, so we're back to full.
You too. I do one project I love is it's called Night Song. It was created by Daryl Bickle. It runs every Sunday evening, most Sundays, at the First Congregational Church, and it's basically plain chants. His versions of plain chants along with Gregorian hymns, and I just do free modal improv behind it. And I've been doing that for about 12 years now, in the dark with candles.
That's awesome.
It's pretty chill. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, very cool.
I like that.
Great.
And
Well,
and I cook a lot.
Oh, good. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I like
That's always
to
good
cook
seeing your
with my
some
daughter.
wild creations. It's always making me hungry, man. That's the one thing about living in Brooklyn is I don't get a grill, you know. But
okay.
someday perhaps.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yep.
Yeah, well, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully, people's heads aren't spinning too much. But I'm happy that you could give the people at large just a little taste, the idea of some of the things you're doing. Is there anything that you feel like we've left out, or you'd like to add, or
yeah, I'm sure, and people gonna go, I have questions. So if they want to contact, they should get in contact with you, and you can put them in contact with me if you can't answer the questions.
Sure.
So
and they can find you on your website, or they can find us where
Yes.
they'll know where to find
Yeah,
Gravity Arts, gravityarts.com.
gravityarts.org.
Or
Ben
sorry.
or Ben Schwendener. No, it's fine. It's a nonprofit. It's
.org.
Or benschwendener.com. Both sites which need a little bit of updating, but they'll get it.
Yeah.
Soon enough.
Great. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Ben. This has been really really informative, man. Really great. It's good to see you. It's good to see you again.
It's great to see you too, Bobby. Good luck with everything.
Thanks.
We'll be in touch. Love
No
to
doubt.
Emily.